Hello and welcome to the Women in Cleantech Book Club. I'm very excited to talk about this book today, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. My name is Joey Scholl, Events Director for WCS. Thank you all for being with us today and choosing to dedicate an hour and a half of your time on this beautiful fall evening to attend this event and talk about this book. All right, next slide, please.
Let's see. There we go.
We'll start with some quick housekeeping items, then move on to the book discussion, and we have some dedicated time for Q&A, so don't hesitate to drop your questions in the chat. Okay, next slide. Some quick Zoom etiquette before we start. You're probably pretty familiar with it after 3 years of virtual meetings, but a few reminders. Please write your full name and turn on your video if you feel comfortable doing so. We love to see your faces. And we encourage you to drop your LinkedIn in the chat and connect with other attendees. The more you get involved and active during the event, the more you'll benefit from it. Next slide. All right, so who are we? WCS is a nonprofit originally founded in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're now in 13 countries and have a membership base of more than 500 professional men and women. The goal of the organization is to support women in their careers in the clean tech industry. WCS is celebrating its 12-year anniversary, which is pretty impressive considering we're a nonprofit primarily run by our volunteers. And what do we do at WCS? We have monthly events such as panels. We host professional development workshops and social events. We're now a global organization, so keep an eye out for an event near you. We also have a mentorship program, and applications are now open. They close on November 10th. It's an incredible program. We're really excited to kick it off this year, starting in January. And more information is available on the website. And our annual flagship event, WCS Talks, is a TED-style event. Save the date for January 20th, 2024 at Plug and Play in Sunnyvale. Next slide, please. Speaking of events, here are upcoming events. On November 10th, we have a professional development workshop, Talk Climate to Me. On November 16th, we have a social in Denmark. November 17th, we have our LA inaugural event at USC. November 30th, What's Blocking the Way to Net Zero? It's an awesome virtual panel. December 2nd, WCS Cleanup Day in several different cities. December 9th, our WCS Potluck in San Francisco. The 14th, The Future of Modern Livestock and Agriculture. And as we mentioned before, January 20th, save the date for WCS Talks. Next is our membership slide. In case you're not yet a member of WCS, I encourage you to do so. Just scan the QR code to do so, and you'll get reimbursed for tonight's event. Feel free to reach out to me or another volunteer on the call if you have any questions about membership. And next slide, I am pleased to introduce today's presenter and moderator, Jessie Burke. Jessie is a software product manager at Euclid Power, a B2B software startup empowering the commercial and industrial renewable energy sector. She has a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Denver, and previously she co-founded and created a corporate startup marketplace solution in the construction industry. Jessie is passionate about combining what she loves to do, product management, and what she cares about, saving the planet. She resides in Encinitas and spends her free time playing with her beautiful dog, running, and surfing. Jessie, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your time with us to talk about this book. I'll pass it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to start this call with like a little icebreaker. It's a small group, so we can unmute if you like, but wanted to go around and say, like, what are all of your favorite smells? And if you want to say your name and like where you're calling in from too, that'd be cool. I'll start. Mine is, I was trying to find like a rain photo, but like the smell after it rains, so it's called petrichor, which I didn't know that there was a name for it until recently, but yeah, that's a great one.
My name is Heather Enos Graves. We do a lot of cooking, so I don't know if it's like onions cooking in butter or like something
So
baking, like French toast or something. So yeah.
Awesome.
Hi everyone, my name's Maria Tooker. I'm calling in from the Seattle area. Mine would definitely be coffee, or like when you walk into a coffee shop.
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm calling in from Los Angeles, other Heather. And one of my favorite smells is Ponderosa pine, or just, yeah, driving into where a lot of my family is from and the smell of those pine trees.
Amazing.
That one's mine too, Heather. I love that. That smells like camping. It's the best.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. So now going into the book, I don't know, I have it here. I don't know if everyone has read it. It's okay if you haven't. Like, we're gonna kind of go over some of the key themes of the book. If you haven't read it yet, I kind of recommend that it's more of like a chapter a day kind of read. They're kind of all like little short stories, and they have different themes throughout, but it's a really, really beautiful book, and it really makes you think a bit differently about the planet and nature around you. And I think the thing that was really amazing that the author Robin kind of explained throughout the book from different perspectives, like sometimes as a mother, sometimes as a scientist, sometimes as a professor, and like also, of course, as a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation. And it was really incredible, like to see kind of like the back and forth discourse, I guess she had in her mind of like these ancient stories that came from the indigenous people, that like, how does she educate students to care about things beyond just like their genius names or like their qualities? It's more like, why do these things matter, and why is it important that we like really take care of things? So there's a few quotes here, but I think the main one, I think this is on her website, but I could hand you a braid of sweetgrass as thick and shining as the plate that hung down my grandmother's back, but it is not mine to give, nor yours to take. Wingashak, sorry, belongs to herself. So I offer in its place a braid of stories meant to heal our relationship to the world. So the book goes through like 5 different sections. The first being planting sweetgrass, which really brings up one of the main themes throughout the book, which is reciprocity. It also goes into like the spirit of community, a gift economy versus market economy. That one like really made me think a lot, and we'll have a breakout question about that. Gratitude, the 4 aspects of being: mind, body, emotion, and spirit. Next, in tending sweetgrass, it goes into like the need to nurture reciprocal relationships between humans and plants. Kind of like the idea of like tending something will let it grow and thrive. And that's kind of our way of like giving and taking from plants. For picking sweetgrass, there's the gifts of the land provides, finding our unique gifts to give in return. Community and how plants teach in a universal language, which is food. Then the braiding sweetgrass is symbolic of the philosophy and spirituality of the indigenous people. Braid as if it were our mother's hair to show our loving care for her. And finally, the burning sweetgrass. A sweetgrass braid is burned to create a ceremonial smudge that washes the recipient in kindness and compassion to heal the body and spirit. So before we dive into like some of the breakout questions, I kind of wanted to highlight this poem that we'll talk about in a few, but it's maybe not a poem, but it kind of reads as a poem, but it's kind of like a code of conduct called The Honorable Harvest. And it really kind of gives some justifications and rules of conduct, like how to interact with plants and nature. So it goes like this. So know the ways of the ones who take care of you so that you may take care of them. Introduce yourself. Be accountable as the one who comes asking for life. Ask permission before taking. Abide by the answer. Never take the first. Never take the last. Take only what you need. Take only that which is given. Never take more than half. Leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully. Never waste what you have taken. Share. Give thanks for what you have been given. Give a gift in reciprocity for what you have taken. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. Yeah. I love that. That was like reading that page. I think I actually listened to that part, but there's also a really good audiobook with this book too, if you want to listen to it. Does anyone have any questions before we dive into some questions or other themes that I didn't mention that they wanted to bring up about the book too? Okay, cool. All right, so we can dive into the questions. I don't think we need to break out because we only have, there's 6 of us, but there's kind of two groups of questions we can go through. The first is the gift of strawberries. It introduces the reader to the concept of the essence of a gift economy, and what it is at its root of reciprocity. I think she tells this kind of interesting story about, like, imagine you're at a farmer's market and each of the vendors gifted you what they grew. Like, you were walking through the farmer's market and you went up to a stall and you're like, okay, I'm going to get these things. And they're like, no, 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 it's my gift. Like, take it. It's okay. It's for you. And like how kind and sweet that would be. And then you like went to the next vendor and they're like, no, 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 take it. It's my gift to you. And it made me really think about when you go to the store, like to the farmer's market, like how would you measure taking if they were all gifts from these people who tended to them so kindly? So how does this make you think about your current consumption? And
I can everyone hear me okay? I'm wearing headphones, so I sometimes think the sound doesn't work so well. Okay, great.
yeah.
I took a couple notes when I was reading the book. I joined a couple minutes late as well, so if we did,
No worries.
apologies if I missed that. I actually wrote down this part as well, and this like focus on the idea of the gift economy. I found it really salient and relevant, so I'm glad y'all brought it up. I think for me, I tend to think of consumption from like a deficit standpoint, especially as I think about like climate in our world today, just like the risk of overconsumption and the risk of us not having enough of anything. And I think that's probably a pretty next that a lot of folks come into things with as far as shopping for the sake of making sure they have enough. But also similarly, like I definitely view like consuming today in a sense of like, but let me not take more than I might need because either it'll go bad if I take it or someone else might want it also. So I feel like it's a combination of all those thoughts. One of the examples where I feel like I most strongly think about the idea of maybe it's actually, it's like not normal consumption related, I guess. I think about this a lot. The neighborhood I live in has a lot of free libraries. If I see books in the free library that I know I want to read, like I will have a stack of like 30 books in my house that I have yet to read that I just think to myself, oh, I would love to read this book. I haven't bought this book. I have the library. Let me just take it. And I feel like when I was reading this part of the book, it made me think of that aspect of my consumption. Just like, let me be thoughtful about like when I have time and I know I have space in my brain to read, like let me choose to do this. Similarly, it's like if I know that I actually need this food or I need this item, let me choose to buy it. And so I think I still continue to do it in kind of 2 different ways. Sometimes I'm very conscious of taking too much, and sometimes I'm conscious that I don't take enough for the same reason. And so it's kind of an interesting balance to find. And I guess I'm curious if other people feel similarly.
Definitely. Thank you. Does it make anyone like think twice next time you go to the grocery store about like how much you take?
Yeah, I definitely think it reminds me kind of like the European mindset when shopping for just like going to making multiple trips to the market in a week because you're just getting like food for that day or just what you need rather than I love I feel like Costco is so American and you just see everyone filling up all their pantries and their freezers and I don't know how necessary it is, but maybe that's also kind of lends to why we think we need more and to make more because we don't have trust or faith that will be provided for. So we kind of have this scarcity mindset.
For sure.
It also kind of makes me think of like March of 2020, which I'm sure was a great time for everyone
Oh
when
my God.
everyone was panic buying everything and like creating those like artificial shortages.
Mhm.
Definitely. I think like, especially with the harvest, the honorable harvest thing, like I think there's kind of like a underlining meaning here of like, if you see an apple tree, are you going to take like all the apples that it gave you, or like you just take a few, like only what you need, like, oh, like I just want one or something, and like leaving some for others, like what you've all said, minimizing waste and destruction.
This made me think of The Giving Tree.
Yeah,
Such a beautiful book. I love that.
definitely. I love that one too.
I don't know. I reread it recently and I'm like, I wasn't crazy about it. The female giving everything to the male
True.
and then not being
There's
grateful
another,
at
yeah.
all.
Mhm.
Underlining the theme there.
Yeah,
No,
I
but
feel
going to the
like,
idea of like,
go ahead. Was it Heather or Maria?
but
Go ahead.
it was Heather. Like thinking through that idea of gift, and I was listening to this on audiobook while on my commute, and so I'm like, I'm burning fossil fuels on my way to my commute, but I kind of have to do the commute to have the job. But I kind of flipped it of like, what would I be willing to let go of, or to get rid of in order to help save the planet? So it's not just like, what would I take or what would I take less of, but what would I like? And I haven't come up with an answer yet, but but it was interesting. It's like, okay, what would I be willing to give up to help save the planet?
Amazon.com. That's one of the, we don't have it, but, and it made me like reduce a lot of my consumption, because I was just like, okay, if something I really need, then I'll go buy it at the store. But I will say I'm very privileged because I don't have children, which I understand like takes a lot of, I know it can be like a huge thing for parents who don't have time because they're like working and kids. And so you're like, so caveat
Which is
there.
like so hard because I feel like this all relates to our whole society being just built not wrong, but maybe not in alignment with nature. Because it's like, why would parents be so overwhelmed and rushed if we weren't, working together or living in like a tribal society where we're raising children in groups, and responsibilities are more shared. So yeah, it's hard. It's like every aspect feeds a negative aspect, whereas there could be, it's all ripe for disruption.
Definitely. And I think I always, whenever it comes to like sustainability too, I always like flinch at like, oh, I need to be, or like hearing people say I need to be better, or like I need to cut back my consumption. But I'm like, oh, but what about like the very large corporations that cause the most damage? And so it's, yeah, it's a toughie. Well, okay. So the next one was like learning the grammar of animacy, introduces the concept of communing with nature by getting to know more about plants and recognizing that they are not inanimate objects. There's like a few different things here, but one with that, she talked a lot about like, how do you think we would like change how we interact with nature and plants if we didn't call it, but we called it like he, she, them, like if that would change how we see them as, rather than from resources, then like community. It just kind of like sounds a little woo-woo, but it does really make you think. And the other aspect was like, she references it so often we can recognize over 100 logos, but only about like 10 leaves or plants near us, which is wild about our economy again, but in world. But what can you do to like start learning more about the plants in your immediate environment? And if you address the plants as something other than it, would it change your attitude, and how?
Yeah, I love this prompt because it's so fitting. I was listening to a podcast today that was interviewing this woman called Snow Raven, and she was born in Arctic Siberia, and she immigrated here maybe 5 years ago, but she really wants to kind of infuse the Western world with her native teachings and upbringings. And she can do incredible things with her voice. You know, tribally, they had a lot of songs, and that was their way of communing, or shamanistic rituals. But when they were little, like at the age of 3, she can remember just spending time with the animals and the plants, and like mimicking their calls. And just by doing that, you commune similarly as like personifying them. You're communing on a different level, and you are one with them rather than the separateness. I guess that like separateness is kind of the issue in our society, is, and it ties back to grabbing all the food for the pandemic. It's a false, it was a false scarcity, because if your neighbor has everything in their house because they just piled up, we'd be fine, but we don't. But that's that separateness aspect of like, we're not looking over the fence.
Yeah.
It gives it a whole different meaning when you do call them he or she, because it's like your relatives. You wouldn't want to, stomp on them or hurt them.
You should share that podcast. That sounds really cool.
I'm going to link that right now.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And then I dove down a rabbit hole, and I found this YouTube that also, like, I guess not interviewed, but hosted that same woman, Snow Raven. And she, like, they went out into nature, and they went to just a normal spot like that people pass on a hiking trail all the time. And they communed with this oak tree. And at the end, she had like the famous YouTuber hugging the tree. And Snow Raven was like, "What is the tree telling you?" And the YouTuber was like, "He's saying that he sees all these people coming by, and like he's always been here, and none of us like acknowledge him, yet he'll continue to be here." And she was just saying, she's like, "Yeah, we act like it's so weird, like tree huggers, like they're separate from us. But in reality, if you had like a big corporate Wall Street CEO hug a tree, they would feel that inside of them. Like we all connect on an innate level of that, connectivity with nature, but we like act like it's weird until we do it."
Yeah, definitely. I think so too. I think it's like the grounding thing too, like how we're in our house all day working or at work, and like you have shoes on, so you don't like feel your feet on the ground or like the soil, and like just like connecting with nature more often. Like I think they like those studies about even just like standing barefoot in grass for like 10 minutes a day can have like crazy effects on you, but people kind of think that's like wild as well. Or don't get to do that also.
I also liked in this part of the book, the author sort of challenged us as the readers. I remember this part. I also listened to the audiobook version, which I really enjoyed. I went on a lot of walks while I was listening to, which I felt like was probably what she, as the author, really wanted everyone to do a little bit. But she challenged the reader to animate inanimate natural objects, or to acknowledge the humanity in natural objects, but to kind of hold unnatural inanimate objects in that like existing space where they already are, as a way to differentiate, like, when you're eating, let's say, like a loaf of bread, recognizing like that came from wheat, which came from fields, and somebody had to put in a lot of work to actually like make the bread that you were eating, in a way that when you're sitting on your couch or using your cell phone. Like, yes, there's still a lot of human engagement required to like create that thing and foster that experience, but it requires a lot of non-natural pieces. And I loved kind of that way of framing it too, because I just think there's so much respect in acknowledging the like natural sources of things. I think I feel that way a lot about, I think like at the beginning of a meal, like acknowledging like the food that we're about to have. Growing up as a kid, like I would have say grace with my family, right? And I feel like I have a very different mentality about that now, in which what I really want to do is just like acknowledge like all the work that was put in by all the myriads of people who like helped provide the food that I was then fortunate enough to be able to eat, right? And I feel like the author did a really good job of framing that up in comparison to this idea of like, and let's also acknowledge like the built world as not being natural, and and holding it apart in that way, and perhaps having like slightly less appreciation in a way that I think like is very natural for myself, and I'm sure many other people, to feel a lot of dependency for the like built world instead, and actually like kind of flipping it on its head. That was a big part of, I feel like, what I took away about this part of this aspect of the book.
Definitely. And I think like when you talked about inanimate, like then actually not being inanimate, because it's like if a tree can die and it can be alive, it's technically animate. It can breathe, it can, you know, like communicate with other trees through their fungus in the root systems and everything. And it's like, oh, why is it like as a society we've like learned to kind of call these like not alive things, even though they truly are alive?
I also thought a little bit about the like gendered nature of our language when I was reading this part of the book, because I do think there's a component of, and the author might have written about this, I can't quite remember now because it was so far into the beginning of the book, but sort of just like the realities and the limitations of, I feel like, the English language and a lot of like romantic languages, which have the masculine and like feminine versions of the. I just think that we're so restricted in like how we're able to acknowledge the humanity in things in such a like gendered way, that I think is also probably was like regressive in a lot of ways, but also like probably pretty harmful to like recognizing the like broader humanity of the creatures in the like non-built environment that we're a part of. So I feel like that just like resonated for me as the author was describing that too.
Definitely. I think there was like the chapter, I think, about like the three sisters. There's the corn, I think the sweet peas and the squash. Maybe there's I don't know if I got sweet peas right, but that they're all sisters and that they like take care of each other in different ways. And yeah, it's really incredible. I think it was just like a really cool story to actually view those things not as things, but sisters and women like supporting each other.
Yeah. I also think it's so different from the way that we like farm, like all of our mass farming. I watched a really great movie, gosh, it was probably like 4 months ago now, but about regenerative agriculture, which perhaps some of you are more familiar with that than I am. But I feel like the story of the three sisters really like exemplified that narrative to me, of this idea of like, oh yeah, the way that we farm today is like really not good for the natural world. And like monocultural farming and just like the sheer amount of pesticides that are used and other things of that nature is like really harmful in a way that like I think it was like the second sister is the beans, and like she's able to provide, I think it's nitrogen in the soil, which like serves as a natural pesticide. And if the beans are not grown near the corn, then the corns do need pesticides. And just this like, oh, we have a natural solution. Like it's been known by folks who are part of native communities and native cultures for millennia, and we're just like choosing to disregard it. That really stood out to me as like from a climate standpoint, like we have solutions to our own problems and we're sometimes choosing not to use them, which I found really interesting.
Definitely. Love that. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments?
I did find the three sisters discussion just fascinating. of how they work so well together. Because yeah, like the beans provide the nitrogen, which is the fertilizer, and then the leaves of the squash are just like low, so they keep in the moisture and protect against bugs, and just how they're so intertwined. And yeah, it does get you to stop and think of like, why don't we do it more like this, and why are we so quick to dismiss some of the indigenous teaching sometimes? Because we, and she kind of brought it up too, sometimes, of like the lens of science. And so everyone wants like the data and to back everything up. It's like, well, we forget that these teachings have been passed down because, in some ways they did do the science. Like they might not have known, like, oh, the plants need nitrogen to grow, but they saw that the beans and the corns and the squash seem to grow better together than separately. And so it's like they at least took observations and noted the results and tried to continue that. So yeah, I found it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And like we can deduce like why corn is planted like in massive fields, because they use those huge combines to use it. But then there's like, it still brings up the whole aspect of like reciprocity, and like, so the soil gets like so depleted because all the nutrients gets removed from it. And like, because having man involved, or like man and woman involved tending to things, is like so important for the longevity of nature too. It's just like this cycle. Every decision we made, you're like, and if you just went to this, learned from these people, then we could have avoided other things. Okay. In this story, Maple Sugar Moon, Nanimbozo finds that people have grown lazy due to the bounty of the first maple trees. He removes this culture of plenty by diluting the sap and teaching the people to honor and respect the gift of the maple tree. Can you draw any parallels from the story in our consumer-driven economy? In what ways are we wasting Earth's gifts, its non-renewable natural resources?
Yeah, so my background is in environmental science, and I did some research when I was still in school on like natural resource management and ecology. And I always thought that like I had a pretty solid understanding of like managing your personal resource consumption and managing your usage of non-renewable natural resources. But there's this website that actually calculates your own personal Earth overshoot day, which is the day in the calendar year where you've surpassed in your own resource consumption, the Earth's ability to naturally replenish what you're taking. And mine was like the middle of July, which means that for 6 months out of the year, I'm overusing resources. So that was kind of like an eye-opening thing, because it kind of shows you the way that like you are wasting and overusing like natural resources. And it gives you like some suggestions on how to cut that down. And I just think like, if I have someone who has that background in that field, like, and is consciously making an effort, if that's still how early mine is, I wonder how early like the average person's is.
Can you share it if you have the link still?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to find it and put it in the chat.
Thank you. That sounds so interesting. Anyone else?
Yeah, I loved this. How do you call it? Just like a story within their culture, to say that, yeah, by working for something or putting in a level of sweat equity, you have much more respect for it. And it's kind of like if you're a renter versus owning a house, like sometimes just the way in which you treat a house is different. And it's that level of ownership of you put something into it as well to receive. And yeah, kind of going back to the gift economy as well, that reciprocity. for which you two have been given a responsibility. But yeah, in application to our culture today, I think about this book, Chop Wood, Carry Water. And it kind of just talks about almost, you can apply it to anything. And like, there's this goal of reaching enlightenment, but enlightenment is really in the action of just doing. And that's kind of like what extracting maple from the tree is like. Just hard work, but it pays off.
Yeah. I feel like, I think we like always think of it as like, or our society like thinks of it as like, it's my reward. Like I earned this, when really it's like, no, it's your gift from like the tree for tending to it and like taking care of it, and like that, it's that back and forth. And yeah, I think that's interesting that we always like think like, oh, I'm gonna work really hard so I can get my pay or get my bounty or whatever. But yeah, and I think like the thing that you were mentioned too of like taking care of what you have, like we try to like reuse and like fix things a lot. Like if something breaks in our house, I'm like, okay, let's try to fix it. Or like I had an old table and it's like, okay, let's sand it down and like stain it so it continues to like keep being useful and like beautiful and everything, and taking care of like what you have, because then you can enjoy it for so much longer rather than just like buying and replacing and wasting.
For some reason that sparked a memory of, I'd gotten an electric tea kettle because I love tea, and it had stopped working after like 2 or 3 months. So I contacted the supplier and they're like, okay, we'll replace it, but you need to like cut the cord and show us a picture that you cut the cord before we will send you a replacement. I'm like, okay, do you have a recycling program? Because it's like a lot of the components could still be reused. Like I feel like it just shorted somewhere, but they didn't have a recycling program at all. And I'm like, what?
That's so annoying.
I mean, this could be fixed, or you could reuse the materials, and you're not even making that effort. I'm like, no, just forget it. I still have it. I want to put it up on like Facebook Marketplace or something and be like, hey, if someone wants to try to fix this, it's all yours.
There's the Buy Nothing
Or,
groups on Facebook too. I don't know if you've seen that. There's like neighborhood Buy Nothing, and you can just be like for free and kind of like give it like the community thing that you mentioned.
I actually love those. Yeah, I've been in those like every neighborhood I lived in. They're super handy. Like getting something that I've been thinking about needing, once giving it away. It came up the other day with, I wanted one of those little mocha pots, those little coffee pots. I'm like, yeah, they sell them for, $20 at the grocery store, but someone was giving it away. And I was like, yeah, if you aren't going to use it anymore, I would love it. That is a really good idea. Heather, I bet where you live, they've got one. What you were describing, Heather, made me think too, just about like sort of the globalization of like consumer goods in general. I used to work at Wayfair, the online furniture company, and the like general return policy, which a lot of customers like very quickly got aware of as they would try and return things, or if things were broken or they decided they didn't like them, whatever it was. Wayfair's general policy was just like, okay, get rid of it however you want, we'll send you another one. Because like the reverse logistics were too complicated and they didn't want to incur costs and they didn't want to navigate working with the carriers, things like that. And I feel like I already was such a like local purchaser before working there. And then in working there, I feel like it only exacerbated things because I just realized like the sheer amount of, I didn't realize, but I saw firsthand so often the amount of waste that goes into just like the globalized economy, in a way that like buying something from a local farm is that much less covered in different pesticides or products, et cetera. Similarly, like if and where you are able to, cognizant it is very often more expensive, like the choosing to buy something that's made more locally or reusing something that's given by somebody else, it probably makes you a more conscious and thoughtful purchaser. It definitely makes you a more conscious and thoughtful purchaser, which I feel like fits into this idea of being really intentional about a time maple syrup from a maple tree versus just, oh, I can buy it online or I can grab it at the store when I'm grabbing all the other things that I need. Again, I think Heather, you made this point earlier, like really hard to do that. Jessica, you did too, when like life is so busy because of the society we live in. And so I feel like it's balancing the need to like be thoughtful and be an intentional consumer while also like taking care of your mental and physical health. And so it's always like a balance of those two things. But I think our consumer-driven economy, and especially the globalization of it, is like the direct antithesis of the story of Maple Sugar Moon, or perhaps very directly related to it, and thus the changes that were made to maple trees in this historical story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. You guys all bring up great points. And then it makes me think that kind of like all these companies that make up our society, you know, they were built by individuals and people like us ourselves that didn't have this connectivity to nature in this depth that Indigenous people are like, even here that Robin's sharing with us. And so, yeah, we didn't plan for cradle to cradle. We didn't have the patience to figure out what were the three sisters that could grow together, because we were so incentivized by money or being the first or, you know, yeah, providing for this scarcity mindset that we have. And so, yeah, I wonder too, it's like, what changes need to happen? Yeah, we can make small changes with our choices and do like bottom up in that way. And then also, do we have the same responsibility for the gift we have been given, this wonderful life that we lead, to now be the new change makers and be leading our own companies or making noise within the companies we work at, to rewrite these stories.
I love that. Yeah. And like the power of the consumer too, like maybe not buying from Wayfair. Sorry, Jessica. Yeah, and like buying the antique.
I don't actually work.
It's gonna last
anymore.
all your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can hand it down to your child and everything, like taking good care of it. I think it's hopefully, I know it's not accessible to everyone, though. It's the hard thing. Like, I think the cool bringing community, I think, is like such a huge piece of like how you can actually make things that are more not usually accessible to people, like actually accessible to them. And there's like, I saw this thing on TikTok that it must have been in, I don't know, probably Portland or something, but it was like a community fix it night where people would bring in like things that were broken in their house, like a lamp or like kettle. And there's people like handymen there and like people who knew how to fix these kind of things. And they were just like, yeah, I'll fix it for you. And it was like a way to like connect the community. And I was like, that's so cute. I want that. Yeah. Sorry, my dog is back. Okay, so which one? Okay, in our consumer-driven society, how can we put into realistic practice the covenants of the honorable harvest? How can we teach people to remember that what's good for the land is also good for the people, i.e. the reciprocity and tending to something allows it to thrive, not taking only what we need. I can go back to the honorable harvest thing too.
It sometimes takes a little time to research, because we're talking about time and time constraints and how, yeah, sometimes it's easier just to go to Amazon and order things. And I'm coming from the position of I have like a 1.5-year-old. So it's like diapers and wipes. And I go with the Honest company, but I also know some people do like cloth diapers and reusable. And I'm like, I am not there. I am just not there. But I found like a really good place that I like for getting toilet paper and facial tissues that are from recycled product. And I found a couple places that will do like reusable hair care supplies.
Oh yeah.
And they come in aluminum bottles, and then you can like send the bottles back, or you like refill them or reuse them or recycle them. And aluminum is much easier to recycle and much more likely to be recycled than plastic is. So it's like, it like kind of takes some time to find those places, but it's like, okay, now that I found them, I'm going to try to stick with them. And yeah, just do what you can.
Yeah, Heather, what you just said, I feel like really resonates, which is the acknowledgement that like each one of us individually isn't and can't and shouldn't expect to be doing every single thing perfectly or in a way that is like fully intentional and net zero, et cetera. I think like setting that expectation for ourselves is setting ourselves up for a lot of frustration and disappointment probably. And so finding like what are the specific things that we care about that are accessible to each of us and focusing on those. I feel like also probably comes through in doing that is like visibility to the members of each of our individual communities, to sort of the thoughtfulness that each of us are bringing to certain purchases we're making or certain interactions we're having. I think this goes a really long way too, is, you know, having my own behavior or someone's behavior be distinct and different enough that prompts me to ask them, oh, you know, I noticed that you did X, Y, Z. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you did that? And creating like the actual conversation to learn about, you know, thoughtful research they did on a topic that could help inform how I continue to do things down the line. I feel like that's a big part of the idea of the honorable harvest, is just like the acknowledgement of the natural world, the non-built world, but also like the acknowledgement in like the humanity between us. Like recognizing our own limitations, but also what's most important to each of us to really try to be better as stewards of our planet. I think a long way in helping kind of like foster that in our society more broadly.
Definitely. My friend Lauren is a sustainability influencer, like TikTok influencer, which is kind of cool. I can send her handle, and she does a lot of really cool videos about like, she gets a lot of like hate sometimes because originally she was like, oh, I'm zero waste, but then like she got like so much hate mail and stuff from people being like, I saw plastic in your pantry, when she did like a pantry thing or something. And like, she does these videos kind of like about, don't like attack each other, like let's give each other grace, like give yourself grace too for trying, and then also like can also have a bigger impact rather than on individuals but like on companies by like purchasing and voting against certain things, or like calling out CEOs and, you know, adding them on Twitter or whatever. And like, let's focus our hate and energy or like that towards those people who are like having a way bigger impact than like individuals. But yeah,
I recently went through a book called The New Climate War by Michael Mannon. He's a researcher out of, I think it's the University of Pennsylvania. And so I would definitely recommend it. It's a very recent book, but he was talking about a lot of it is in some ways a war, because there are a lot of companies, especially the fossil fuel companies, that don't want people to change. And so there is a lot of misinformation purposefully put out, and also a lot of division created among those who do care about the climate. And so you actually had this whole section of like, okay, maybe you're a vegan, but then you travel regularly for work and you're on an airplane. Like, how does that balance for the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate? And like, instead of like pointing fingers at each other and like, oh, you're not doing enough, like, think about who's really to blame and really like make them accountable.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was a really interesting thought of like being like the division being purposefully fostered instead of like, hey, we're all just doing what we can. Let's team up against those who are not doing what they can.
Well, and I do think that like the idea of reciprocity, like there are certain industries in our world that are just like fundamentally not reciprocal at their core, right? Like if you imagine drilling for oil, like what is the earth getting for that action, right? And so I do think, yeah, what you just described, Heather, I think really resonates, which is really that point of just like each of us as individuals are not contributing the end all be all difference to making drastic impacts to climate change and meeting climate goals, and really advocating against and in direct support of the innovative organizations who are doing, I think, really impactful work to try and create innovation and migrate us away from dependency on certain things that are necessary for the current way in which we live. I think it is a really big part of that like advocacy and like diplomacy almost, I think is a really important piece, which I think is really hard to just like put on all of us as individuals. Like individual community organizing is really, really hard work to do. But I think it will make probably the biggest difference when we think about actually like moving the needle on a lot of the like climate goals more holistically.
Yeah, I love this topic. I was just deep in this earlier today, applying kind of the similar principles, but to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And someone I was listening to today kind of brought up Einstein's principles of like, well, what got us here isn't going to get us there. And there being peace, there being a balance of resource usage, there being, squashing climate change. And so like the energy of the problem cannot be the energy of the solution. And if division is what's happening now, we have to do everything in our power to reverse that by pulling the other side closer. And that means like viewing everyone, whether you're red or blue or left or right, as all seated at this round table and they're brothers and sisters and they're next to us. And it's, hearing through ears of compassion and empathy, because we're all just trying our best and encouraging that out of someone. I know, like, even in personal relationships, when you immediately assume or jump to conclusions that the other person is not acting in your best interest, it pushes them even further away and they want to commit to their position even more. So yeah, I totally agree. We have to kind of just live in light and allow that to reflect and only encourage through our own actions and doing.
I love that. Thank you. Maria, did you have any thoughts too on the honorable harvest and reciprocity?
Yeah, sorry, I had to step away from my computer
No
for the
worries.
beginning of that.
No problem. You also don't need to, no pressure. Yeah, okay. The last one is like based upon the central themes as presented by Dr. Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass, explain the difference between reciprocity and the current ecological movement known as sustainability.
Yeah, so I was at the Verge conference with one of my friends and my colleague Lindy Wellenbrock last week, and we were at one of the roundtables. I think it was I think this was the roundtable on the newest version of LEAD. And one of the women we were sitting with actually had a really good analogy as far as reciprocity goes and your impact with sustainability. She's like, sometimes the best thing you can focus on is your handprint, not your footprint. It's not necessarily about reducing what you're using, it's about what you're actively changing systemically going forward.
That's so cool.
Mm.
I love that. Yeah. Makes you kind of think more directly too, of like, okay, when you go to reach for something at the store, like go to reach for click to buy something online, or puts that more, a little bit more direct than the foot.
I also feel like sustainability, as we kind of define it, is a really, at least the way I picture it in my head, is a really like individual act in a lot of ways. It's like, what am I choosing to consume? What am I choosing to purchase differently or not purchase at all? In a way that reciprocity is so community oriented. And I think in reading this book, I was just so broadly educated on just like the scope of like what building healthy community and thoughtful community at all ages really can look like, in a way that I think doesn't translate super well to our like typical Western society. One thing I know that that she had written in the book was about the idea, I'd actually written it down, just the fact that like there are lots of sort of fables and stories told about the like risk of taking too much to children in as members of the tribe that she was in, and the fact that like none of those fables exist in English was just like such a, like I definitely thought to myself like, yeah, I haven't heard any of these. Like I don't remember learning these as a child. But I feel like similar, like it's such a like community oriented expectation, which I think is really unique and is probably one of the biggest differences between reciprocity as I read it in the book and really how our like current sustainability movement looks today. And perhaps I'm just doing this on an individual level and other folks have figured out a better way to do this in community with others. But I feel like that's one thing that stands out to me as well as a difference.
Definitely. Yeah, I really agree with that. Yeah. Like it's just like, how can I reduce as much as possible? But it's also like, how can you give back too? And that piece
Right.
of like, how can we make things more accessible for other people, so that they can make also sustainable solutions, not have it just be kind of like a privileged step in your life that I don't think is accessible for everyone.
I love that. It's like the call to service, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a privilege, and we can be grateful for it, but we also have the responsibility to do something bigger than ourselves.
Definitely.
One thing that came up in the New Climate War was the discussion. I think it was the New Climate War. I've been reading a lot of climate-based books recently, apparently, but discussion about the green premium and how like electric vehicles are currently much more expensive than combustion-based vehicles. And so it's those who have the privilege who are able to buy them, even though they're more expensive, do need to kind of step up and buy them to support that. So that, like, being willing to create that demand so that the supply can increase, so that the price can decrease. And yeah, kind of like that, like maybe you're just one piece, but you're still part of that market, and that able to like drive change in that way.
Yeah, like the companies too, making decisions to like make like sustainable options have to be expensive. Like they are, because they're like scarce right now. But like if it became more of a norm across like companies to use reusable materials, or like became more accessible, or farming practices and everything, it would lower the cost for people. or just like not always being so driven by just solely profit, or I guess like giving and taking a little bit. Yeah. Balancing that more so that other people can have access.
Also governments, because I feel a lot of
Yeah.
the industries that are so successful today were originally incentivized by law or policy making. And I mean, yeah, even look to COVID, who got bailed out by the government or these massive corporations. And government should respond to the people. So in that way, shape, or form, we can show up as well and try to steer the conversation. Yeah, I'm working in end of life management for solar and developing a startup there. And it's like, so we're just talking to so many policymakers, just hoping like conversations need to kick off there and bills need to be written to say, hey, you know, we incentivize putting new solar down, but what about the incentivization for recycling? Because it is so expensive. People would obviously want to choose the option they can afford, which is landfill.
Yeah.
Heather, you might know this better than me. So Heather, e.g., when you were talking about EVs, I was thinking about solar and like the commodification of solar. So Heather H, you might know this better than me since you work in solar, but I've read that that's like an industry or like an energy source that actually like cost-wise has gone down like so massively as it's scaled in the US. I think partially on account of the Inflation Reduction Act and just partially on account of like the scale at which it works today, thanks to community solar programs and more like individuals investing in having it in their homes. I feel like it's a really good example of the fact that like EVs are also going down, partially on account of more recent funding from like the federal government with tax incentives and things like that from the Inflation Reduction Act too. But I just think that's like such a huge piece of it is like the chicken and the egg, like we want the demand, but we also need the supply. And like, how do we go from one to the next, I think is really difficult, but it's really exciting to see, I think areas like solar, which really I think are gaining a lot of momentum because it seems like the market has found an effective way to like establish cost and create incentives for customers to want to buy, which it just is like super motivating for me to be like, okay, we have like a few lights at the end of various tunnels that we're working towards.
Definitely. In California, the Tesla, like the lowest model now, is cheaper than a Toyota Corolla if you were to get like both new cars. Which is crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. If like with the
incentives. The incentives are really interesting. I'm looking into buying my next car. And I'm struggling with the question of like, what do I invest in? Heather, e.g., to your point, I feel like I should commit to investing in an electric car because the demand is there. And like, if I have the ability to charge it at my house, I should. One of the struggles I'm navigating is the fact that the way that the tax incentives works is it's only if their final production is in the US. And so like you're limited to Tesla or I think Rivian or Ford. So I'm considering, I think the Ford Escape, they have like a plug-in hybrid option. But like a lot of, I think the slowly becoming more affordable options, the Hondas, the Toyotas, the Kias, et cetera, like none of those are actually eligible. And so like the tax incentives that would make them more affordable are actually not accessible because of policy, which comes back, I feel like Heather H, to your point around like the politics like need to also be in support of a lot of this stuff to really help move the needle here. And like Tesla can only produce so many new EVs a year. And if there's demand, like customers aren't going to buy the other cars if they're going to pay an extra $8K to do so. I'm not, at least. I guess I can't speak for everyone, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And then you also have to think too, like mechanics. Eventually your car will break down, although I don't think there is quite as many moving parts, which helps because there's not as much wear and tear. But then also being able to find a mechanic who can fix an electric vehicle. And also little by little, I think the used market for electric vehicles are coming up. But yeah, it's like you can definitely get a used car, combustion engine, much easier than a used electric vehicle.
I was actually chatting with one of the guys at Rivian, and he said they have mechanics kind of strategically placed everywhere, and they'll even come to you, which I thought was very cool because I had that same concern. So it seems like good solutions are coming. And hopefully they'll arrive to you with an electric vehicle.
Yeah. Just got to get it in my price range.
No, that's why I had to buy a car in 2020. And I got like a very fuel efficient car, but I'm like so bummed now looking back that I'm like, oh, I really wish I had an EV now because I live in California and it would be very nice. But one day. Okay, cool. Well, that was my last question. Is there anything other like themes or stories you all wanted to bring up about the book that we missed or?
I don't know about you guys, but I'm actually only on page 111, so I haven't finished.
That's okay.
But when we started this, it was kismet timing because me and my girlfriends had actually started our own book club for this.
Oh, cool.
This is like one of my favorite books ever. I'm not even done. I don't know if how everyone else is responding to this, but I'm like, I've already sent it to 2 other people unrelated to these book clubs. Like, we need to spread the word. This is amazing. This makes you want to love the earth and just roll around the ground and make some serious change.
I know. I wish I could like select like 5 chapters or something or like stories to share with people who like can't commit to the book or something and just be like, just read these.
Right?
You know?
I know it's so scary, but it's like, oh, it's potent.
I know.
I know this is one of those books too, though. I mean, like I've been hearing about it for forever and like kept meaning to pick it up and read it, and then finally got around to it like for this book club, and I'm so glad that I finally did.
Yeah, I was in a similar position, so thank you for like organizing team for putting this together, because I think I've been meaning to for a long time and never got around to it. So this was the prompter that finally got me to get it out of the library.
I think what's sad is like I am such a big reader, so I always have some book, and so now I'm like, okay, I'd really like to read more books like this, but then I'm like, how do I even go about finding that?
Yeah.
And I know for me, especially this month, we're coming into the like Indigenous Peoples Month, and getting more insight into the Native Americans and the Indigenous people who are in this area. And I think she handled it really well. Of atrocities did happen, and we need to acknowledge that, but then we can also still learn from the past and also learn as we're moving forward. I think she was talking about like in one of the later chapters, like the people of like the 7th fire or something, where they have to go back and find all of the information and all of the pieces that were lost by the peoples as they moved. So yeah, I'm like, where can I find more books like this? 1, and just learn more about it. And then 2, also with Thanksgiving coming up, I'm like, this really changes my view of Thanksgiving. In some ways it's good, like learning about the gift giving culture, but then also thinking about like how Thanksgiving started and the Puritans and the other settlers coming over. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to suggest that we try going through the Thanksgiving address on Thanksgiving as a way to try to like honor that and start something a little new that's, I don't know, I guess hopefully rebalances or as a way of giving a gift.
I love that idea. Yeah. I'm not doing Black Friday. Okay.
I love that idea too, Heather. I did want to share, Heather, you were talking about other books to read. I just read a book written by a Native author, and she's from a tribe that's originally based up here in the Pacific Northwest. I live in Seattle, and they had it in the library. And I feel like it was very focused on like the really like the cultural belief system of the tribe that she was part of. It was a little bit less, I would say, like ag focused, but still a really fantastic book, much shorter. It was a very quick read. It's called Thinning Blood by Leah Myers. I just looked it up, but I would highly recommend it if anyone's looking for just like to support other Native American authors. I really loved it. It was memoir style, so I would say similar in that way, but shorter and very much focused on her family and really like the tree of her and her
It's
the
soon.
like matriarchal line. In case anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. I typed this in.
Great. Okay, well, I'm going to pass it back to Joey. There's a few other slides to go through.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jessie, for leading this really rich conversation. I've got the book downloaded, so I'll keep working my way through it. But thank you so much. We appreciate your time and guiding this discussion. And if you like this event, we have more. Please mark your calendars for the upcoming events. They're all listed on our website. And next slide. WCS has merch. Use code WCS15OFF for 15% off your purchase. We have some fun stuff in there, and it is a print as you go. So we're not ordering tons of stuff, and we're trying to be responsible with our merchandise too. Okay, next slide. And thank you to our volunteers like Jessie. We could not host these events without our volunteers. And scan the code if you're interested in volunteering for WCS. After 3 months of service, you get a free membership, which gives you free access to all of our events. So I highly encourage you to do so. And one of our new volunteer roles that we have open is a fundraising manager. So if you're interested in that and really love fundraising, please check it out. Next slide. And if you're not part of our Slack community, this is a member benefit, and it gives you first look at our events, new job postings, and it's a really great place to network and find a mentor too. Next slide. And social media. If you're not following us on social, here are all of our handles. And that is all I have for you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time and this conversation. This was wonderful.